Hello, friends, and welcome to more study of Brihat Samhita's Chapter 5. We'll look at more stuff about what Varahamihira says about eclipses, interpreting eclipses. And today we'll hear some stuff that finally sounds pretty familiar to us. So to begin, he's talking about if the eclipse happens in various zodiac signs. Yay, something that we're familiar with. So we're at the 35th statement of chapter 5. He says, if the sun and moon are eclipsed. Now, he's kind of come over, at this point in the chapter, he's kind of come over from only talking about solar eclipses. He's been talking about Rahu, actually. So he's talking about Rahu's eclipses. So it can be of the sun or of the moon. In the beginning of the chapter, he's more focusing on the solar eclipse, but here he comes to talk kind of about them equally, sun and moon eclipses. He says, if the sun and the moon, I think it should be sun or moon. Yeah, some of the other texts say sun or moon. If the sun or moon should be eclipsed when in the sign of Aries, right? So if the eclipse is in Aries, then he's going to identify certain countries that get problems, but the countries are all from the 6th century. And it's hard to even really know where they lived. But he's going to also say a certain type of person. So let's just focus on a certain type of person. So he says, if you get an eclipse in Aries, then people who live by fire get affected. So who lives by fire? It's not just firemen. It's like blacksmiths, cooks, perhaps computer people, perhaps because electricity could be considered a type of fire. People that work with fuels, things like that. The next statement is, if the eclipse happens in Taurus, then you get problems to agriculture. Agriculture and rich people. So basically business suffers. So if it's in Aries, you get like people that work with fire and, what do they call that these days? Fuel, what is that? The whole like coal, oil, natural gas industry, that whole fuel industry. The sun and moon, yeah, that's for Aries, and then Taurus is for agriculture, rich people, business people. If it's in Gemini, it's very simple, right? His techniques are very simple. If the eclipse happens in Gemini, then you get problems for people who live on the banks of the Jamuna. That means for romantic people, by the way, because Gemini is Matuna. So it's going to affect Gemini-like people. This is his paradigm. His paradigm is the eclipse affects the sign that it occurs in. And so something basic about what the sign symbolizes will get affected by the eclipse. That's his paradigm. So with Gemini, his suggestion is children, younger children, like unmarried people, not younger children like that, but like teenagers, the age where they're sexually active but not married yet. Powerful, and also smart people. People that are Gemini-ish. Entertainers, you might say. No, it doesn't have anything to do with the element of a graha. It's about the sign. There's no graha involved. It's the sun and moon getting eclipsed. If the eclipse happens in Aries, it affects people that work with fire and fuel. If it affects somebody that if the eclipse happens in Taurus, then it affects the mercantile and agricultural class. If it happens in Gemini, then it affects the young people and students type of people. Oh boy, you guys. Distracting. All right. Then in Cancer. Abhira, Shabara, Pallava. Who else? Let's see if there's anybody we know about. Nobody. They just mentioned. Let's see what footnotes are on these people. So I guess you're left on your own to figure out what happens. He does say something generic about Cancer. He says that the food is there's going to be a problem with food if an eclipse happens in Cancer. I guess because Cancer is the mother and the nourisher. So maybe you can think about maybe it affects mothers, stuff like that. If it's in Leo, if the eclipse is in Leo, then it affects kings, military. If it's in Virgo, then it affects writers, poets, history, people and rice or grain. If it eclipses in the sign of Libra, then it affects the West, the extreme West. Makes sense, right? So I bet you his other thing with the countries is probably a simple thing about like Aries is to the east, so the people to the east suffer if the eclipse is in Aries. Cancer is to the north. It's probably simple like that. Everything else is simple. If the eclipse is in the sign of Sagittarius, then you get teachers have problems, ministers, people that are the advisors of the society have problems, and also this warriors who are very skilled, like the martial artists or the high class warriors, suffer. So it's going to be military if it's. How did he go all the way to? Okay. I think I skipped Scorpio. If it's in Scorpio, then people that deal with poison and medicine will suffer. If it's also interesting to see what he's kind of isolating about each sign. If it's in Sagittarius, then it's, you know what I'm saying? If it's in Sagittarius, then it's the kind of teacher, guide, and since it's a fire sign, it includes like a skilled military person. Leo is also like a military person, but it's more like the generals, the decision makers, the kings. If it's in Capricorn, fishes, family ministers. So it's going to affect fish if it's in Capricorn, because Makara or Capricorn is a sea creature. The families of ministers, the Chandalas, which means the socially boorish people, the socially fringe people, skilled magicians and physicians, and old soldiers. So I was waiting to see what he was going to say about Capricorn because the eclipse in December was in Capricorn. And so he does mention physicians. and old people get affected. So coronavirus, I was just looking today at statistics. It's like 0% fatality rate if you're under 9 years old. And all the way up to 50 years old is like well under 2% fatality rate. But over 50 years old is like much higher than 2%. It's an interesting disease. Virgo, I don't think I skipped Virgo. I said it was poets, stuff like that, rice. Capricorn, Aquarius, you get men of Western countries. Interesting. Shepherds, serpents, citizens, and people of Barbara. That's kind of got to be Romish area. Robert, shepherds, serpents. If it's in the sign of Pisces, now why not fish here? The products of the sea. Men of respectability and of learning, and persons that live by water. Okay. He also says also the provinces will be affected which correspond to the nakshatra, as well as the... So he's also saying consider the nakshatra and the zodiac sign of the eclipse simultaneously. Now he says solar and lunar eclipses are of 10 kinds, and they are technically known as Savya, Apasavya, Lehana, Grasana, Nirod, Avamardana, Aroha, Arghata, Madhyatama, and Tamatya. If the eclipse should occur on the left side of the disk, it is Svagira. The earth will then be flooded with water, and there will be joy and freedom from fear. If it should commence on the right side, it's technically known as Abasavargya. Mankind will suffer from the rulers and robbers. If the solar or lunar disk be just dimmed by darkness all around, which disappears immediately, the eclipse is technically known as Lehan. All creatures will be happy, and the earth will be flooded with water. The eclipse was in Mulabarda, which is also medical and difficult. If a third or fourth or one half of the disk should be eclipsed, it is technically known as Grasana. The wealth of prosperous princes will diminish in prosperous countries. So, again, take away the basic idea that it's not always bad for everybody. An eclipse is not always bad. In fact, sometimes it's good. And so I think you have to put two and two together. Like if you get an eclipse commencing on the left side of the disk, it's supposed to produce good effects. So if it happens in the sign of Gemini, it should produce good effects for the youthful people. Because it's in Gemini, it'll affect the youthful people. And it's an interesting thing that if it's a partial eclipse, then it means a diminution of the rulers, so the powerful people. This is a cool one. If the eclipse should commence at the edge, travel inward, and remain there for a time in the shape of a dark ball, it is technically known as Nirod, which is a full eclipse. And he says this is a good eclipse. All creatures will be happy. This is a normal eclipse. I think. I can't tell the difference, but the next one is called Avamardana. So that's obviously... Well, if the eclipse should be a total one and continue so for a time, I think it's a particularly long eclipse, it is known as Avamardana. Then the chief provinces will suffer and the chief rulers will be afflicted by misery. If immediately after the eclipse is over, the disk should get eclipsed again by something else, like a cloud, comet, a planet, another thing will go in front of it, it's technically known as a Rohan. The princes will be at war and there will be fear. If a small portion of the disk should be so slightly eclipsed as to resemble a mirror, covered with the vapor of hot breath, then this eclipse is known as Agrata. There will be good rain in the land. So it's like the sun escaped the eclipse. If the middle of the eclipse disk should be dark. So this was also one thing I was thinking about. A lot of the things Varahamihira is talking about is based on you, throughout the whole book, is based on you actually observing things. You don't get that from just the charts. You calculate. You can't tell. What did the December eclipse look like? This or that? I don't know. I didn't see it. And to who and what part of the world? Well, I know it was in Mula, Capricorn. If all around the disk the darkness be thick and in the middle it be a light, the eclipse is known as terminally dark. Antyatama, dark in the middle. Antyatama. Maybe that means reverse darkness, but it seems that the translator got this wrong. But this is a very bad type of eclipse. If the disk appears white, it's very good. If the disk appears white, there's prosperity, but it's bad for people that live with fire, and including Brahmins. Actually, that's interesting for people who live by fire. Ayush has a thing. Do you have thoughts about nodes eclipsing other planets? They don't eclipse the other planets. The nodes are not physical things. The node is the point in space. It's called a node. You know what a node is? It's where two things cross, right? One thing can be accessed by another thing. The node is the place where the moon's path crosses the sun's path. There's nothing actually there. It's just a location. So if Venus goes behind the node, nothing happens to Venus. You don't see it. There's no effect. The only time, even if the sun goes past the node, there's not going to be an effect unless it's conjoined with the moon or it's opposite to the moon. So what's happening is it's this point where the moon and the sun interfere with each other. So it doesn't affect other planets. However, as we talked about in the chapter on the moon can eclipse other planets. And the sun, he didn't mention this in the sun's thing. He slightly mentioned it in the sun's thing, that the sun can eclipse other planets. That's called combustion and called zimi. All right, let's see what else. I'm going to skip a little bit, and he talks about the different colors of the eclipse. If Mercury should see the eclipsed disk, honey and oil will become scarce. This is an interesting one. Did anyone get the logic of all these interpretations that summarize all of the specific prophecies one can make based on particular? It's very simple logic. He's just, it's very, everything that he's presenting in this book so far, except for all the mathematical stuff, is super simple. All of his interpretive techniques are very simple. It's just, it looks like this, therefore that. This color represents this. This thing has this color, so that color represents that. So this thing affects that. This thing is pointing in that direction, so it affects that spot. This thing, has this shape. This shape symbolizes this, so this affects that. It's real simple stuff. Now he's going to say if there's other planets involved with the eclipse. So this is kind of similar to your question then. Ayush. It's not if the nodes eclipse another planet, but if there's another planet involved in the eclipse. So in other words, if the sun and moon are conjunct and Mercury is nearby, quite nearby. Or if the sun and moon are opposite and Mercury is close to the moon. Because then if the sun and moon are opposite at the nodes, if the sun and moon are conjunct at the nodes, or if they're opposite at the nodes, then you'll have an eclipse. And if another planet is near there, he's going to talk about that now. If Mercury is near there, he says, It's bad for honey, oil, and princes. If Mars is near there, there's war, and you get fire problems. If Venus is near the eclipse, it's bad for happiness in general. If Saturn is near it, it makes things dry, famine, that type of thing. He didn't say anything about you. Okay, he says Jupiter. These evil effects resulting from planets being close to the disk of the eclipse apply as well to the time of termination as to the eclipse, as to the commencement. In other words, he's saying, I don't know, he's saying C. I might have to pull out Sanskrit and see what it's actually saying. I might also mean aspecting, but I'm not sure. Now he says Jupiter. If Jupiter, the evils described will vanish just in the same way that the flame of the fire dies out when water is poured over it. So Jupiter will fix an eclipse. However, I think if Jupiter is debilitated with the eclipse, then it counts as a malefic effect. If during the eclipse if during the eclipse you get other bad, weird stuff, like a shooting star, a dust storm, an earthquake, stuff like that, thunder, then you're going to get the same type of eclipse occur within 36 months. That's what he says. I'm surprised he said that. It sounds like something he would say is not true. If Mars should be eclipsed by Rahu, interesting. Now, what does he mean here? The eclipsed or eclipsing lunar or solar disk. Okay, so this means if you get Mars, not just close to the eclipse, but if you get it in the eclipse. Bardo's saying, okay, here's his questions. Yeah, Kali Durga. That's what we talked about with Mula. Yoshi, are the nodes scientifically detectable? They're not detectable, they're points. There's nothing there, it's just a point. Are they calculatable? Yes. In fact, Varahamihira explained how to calculate them earlier in the chapter. Bardo, he just collected data statistics to someone after he could analyze, compare, validate. Just prove his views. I don't know. He's not saying anything about his data. He's not saying in 51 out of 60 cases this happened. He's just giving you examples of how you interpret stuff. So that is also interesting because people today, and I also like to see data. Like my whole compatibility system is based on data. I also like to see data where things correspond, but these older astrologers, they didn't seem to care about data. They never said in 8 out of 10 people we saw blah, blah, blah. They just care on a system that's very basic and self-evident and consistent. This color symbolizes this. So whenever there's an effect of this color, it affects that thing that the color symbolizes. That's how they did their stuff. So he says, if Mars is eclipsed by Rahu, and the commentator says the eclipsed or eclipsing lunar or solar disk. So I think C means, previously he's saying if it's close by, or maybe C is opposite, actually looking at. And now he's talking about if it's close by. That would make some sense. What we previously talked about would be if a planet is aspecting the eclipse, and now we're going to talk about if the planet is conjoined with the eclipse. If it's Mars, he just talks about different countries, and then he says also people with a lot of power will have troubles. If Mercury is eclipsed, it's a bunch of countries, as well as all those youngish people that we talked about before. If Jupiter's eclipsed, then the learned, the kings, the ministers, elephants and horses perish, and persons living in the bank of Indus and in the northern countries will suffer calamity. If Venus is eclipsed, he talks about the different countries, and he talks about women and ministers will be affected with miseries. If Saturn is eclipsed, certain countries, and then the working class. If the solar, let's see if we can finish up this chapter. Gosh, this is pretty long. We're not going to finish this. He's really into eclipses, just like everybody else. Let me see. All right, we got a bit more to get to chapter 6, which is on Mars. I think we're going to... This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to skim through the rest and see what else he talks about. So this is what he said so far. What he said so far is the direction of the eclipse, the fullness of the eclipse, the 6-month period in which the eclipse happens, the color of it. What else? The sign or nakshatra in which it's in, the planets which aspect it, the planets which conjoin it, all should inform your interpretation of what the eclipse affects, and the eclipse may produce positive or negative results. So not all of your predictions of an eclipse should be negative. Then he's also, additionally in the rest of the month, he's going to say that the month of the year, particularly the lunar month, will be should play some role in what you predict. He's also going to say how they terminate. If it terminates at this point or that point, how the eclipse finishes. And then you get a different prediction based on how it finishes. For example, to read you this, if the edge should first begin to clear all around while there is darkness in the center, then termination is known as Anta Vidarn, where it clears up in the middle first. So then you get the Madhyadesh, the middle countries suffer. Now he's going to say, the next section of the chapter finally says, after the eclipse. Right, so some things can happen right after the eclipse. If within 7 days from the termination of an eclipse, you get a big dust storm, pay attention to that. That's now this is for him in India. If you get a big dust storm, then you're going to get, it's a sign that you're going to get pestilence or lack of crops. If within 6-7 days you get snow, then there's going to be disease. If within 7 days, that was in December, so I'm sure it happened somewhere. If there should be an earthquake, then it's a problem for the kings. If there's a meteor, and you look for that, then the advisors are going to have problems. If you get strange colors in the clouds, then you get people having irrational fears. If you get a lot of thunder within 7 days of the eclipse, then it's bad for pregnant women. If you get lightning, then the people that wield blades, warriors, and that will suffer. If you get within 7 days from the eclipse a halo around the sun or moon, then it causes disease. Stuff like that. Let's see what he says here. If there's a rainbow or a comet that looks like a club, people afflicted with hunger will suffer from foreign yoke. If there should be planetary conjunctions or cometary appearances, princes will be at war with one another. If there should occur a fall of good rain within the said period, then there will be prosperity in the land, and evils described above will disappear. And then he says, if on the new moon day immediately succeeding a lunar eclipse, there should appear a solar eclipse. So if you get a lunar eclipse and then the next new moon is a solar eclipse, so you can either get it so that first there's a solar eclipse, then there's a lunar eclipse, and then you're done. Or you can get it first as a lunar eclipse and then there's a solar eclipse and then you're done. Or sometimes you'll get a partial first one, a fuller second one, and then you'll get a third one. So he's saying if the eclipse cycle starts with the lunar eclipse and then goes to the solar eclipse, then there's dissensions among men, and then people argue, discord between husbands and wives. If, on the contrary, there should occur a lunar eclipse on the full moon day immediately succeeding a solar eclipse, then the Brahmins perform various sacrificial rites and mankind's happy. So what he's saying is, if you're getting eclipses where it starts with the solar eclipse and it goes to the lunar eclipse, that's the normal way. Sun first, moon second. If it goes moon first, sun second, then you kind of get insurrection, and disagreement amongst people. Boy, you guys don't understand. Yoshi, listen. Are the notes created by the gravitational force of the moon? No, just listen really carefully. I've told you this like 4 times already. It's the point where the moon's orbit crosses the sun's orbit. That is the node. If the sun and moon get there at the same time, they get in the way of each other. They eclipse each other. Or if the sun... So there's going to be 2. The moon's orbit is pointed like this, and the sun's orbit is like this. So the moon's orbit is going to hit the sun's orbit here and here as it goes around. This is north node Rahu. This is south node Ketu. So if the sun is here and the moon is here, then you get a lunar eclipse. If the sun and moon are here or here, then you get a solar eclipse. That's what they are. They're not created by gravity, smoke, snakes, anything else. Okay. Hi, Jenna. So that's it. So we finished up the chapter on eclipses with a bang. All right, so the next time we get together will be next week, and we'll talk about Mars. It's going to start by talking about retrogressions of Mars. Okay, guys, I'm going to jump out and get on to Bhagavatam. So stick around on my channel because I'm going to immediately start another stream. Thank you.